Wheeler County, Texas, autumn of 1887. Dry wind scraped through brittle cottonwoods along the edges of an empty creek bed. Dust hung in the still air like a threat not yet named. The town of Marlow sat quiet under a gray-yellow sky, as if the clouds themselves couldn't summon the energy to rain. Cora Dillard stood on the warped front steps of her house, staring across the field that had once been a wheat patch and was now nothing but sunburnt weeds. Her apron flapped in the wind. One hand braced her lower back where the pain had settled in again, sharp and unrelenting since the birth of her youngest. The boy was not yet 2, and already he knew silence as a kind of language picked up from his sisters, and the hush that had settled over their home the day their father went to town and did not come back. The widow had 3 young children. The eldest, May, was 11 and tall for her age, with a pinched mouth and quiet eyes that watched too much. Ruth was 9 and hung close to her mother like a shadow, always looking for things to fix that could not be fixed. The baby Ellie clung to Cora's skirts with one hand and a splintered toy horse in the other. They hadn't eaten meat in 5 days. The hens were laying less. Cora had bartered most of their flour for lamp oil and a bolt of cloth last week, gambling on the hope that she could sew for the schoolteacher's wife and maybe earn a little. But the sewing was slow with her hands so stiff. The nights were colder now, and the stove had to be lit, which meant less wood, which meant she'd have to cut more, which meant time she didn't have. Marlow was a town that minded its business. Folks had offered help at first, but it came with tilted heads and soft pity, and Cora couldn't stomach the way people looked at her like she was half broken already. So she told them no. No, thank you. We're fine. That had been in June. Now it was October, and she was starting to understand the difference between pride and plain stupidity. The old barn leaned sideways like it was ashamed to be standing. The pump behind the house had started squealing again. She would need to dig a new line soon. She was bone-tired, and when she looked at her hands, raw-chapped, bleeding in the cracks, she did not see strength anymore. Just the slow, steady wearing away of someone who used to believe the world gave back what you put in. A horse's hooves clicked against the frozen mud at the edge of the road. She turned her head just slightly. A man rode toward the gate, tall and the saddle reins loose. The animal looked well-fed. The rider wore a flat-crowned hat low over his brow and an oilskin coat that flared slightly with the wind. Cora stepped down onto the dirt path. Her face was blank. The rider pulled up slow. Said nothing at first. Just tipped his hat. "Morning, Mrs. Dillard." She stared. "You're on my land." "Yes, ma'am." "Name's Seth Garner. I got word you were needing firewood." "I never said such a thing." "No, but someone did. Your daughter's friend told her ma, who told mine. Don't need charity." He dismounted slowly, like he was more tired than he looked. He stood with a certain ease, not arrogant, just steady, not offering charity. "I got too many cedar limbs down from that storm 2 weeks back. You'd be doing me a favor taking them off my hands?" Cora folded her arms. "You drove all this way to pretend it's a favor." He looked past her toward the leaning barn, the fence slats pulled up by wind, the girl standing barefoot in the doorway holding her baby brother's hand. His jaw tightened barely. "No, ma'am. I drove all this way to ask one question." She waited. "Do you want to do this alone, or do you want to survive?" The question sat there between them, heavy as a coffin. Cora didn't answer. She turned on her heel and walked back toward the house. He stayed by the gate, waiting. She did not tell him to go, but she did not tell him to stay either. The door closed behind her with a tired creak, and Seth Garner stood where he was, one hand resting on the saddle horn like he had nowhere else to be. Inside, Cora lit the stove with the last stub of kindling and poured water into the kettle. Her shoulders ached. The baby whimpered, and May hushed him, drawing him into her lap with a quiet, practiced touch. Cora glanced once toward the window and saw the man still standing there, unmoving. "Why is he just waitin'?" Ruth asked, her voice low. Cora didn't answer. She stirred the kettle too hard and splashed boiling water on her hand. She hissed and pressed a rag to the burn. Seth came back the next day. He didn't knock, just left 3 bundles of wood at the edge of the path and turned his horse around. Cora watched from the kitchen, jaw tight. The day after that, he brought feed for the hens and a sack of potatoes. Said nothing, just nodded once and left it near the barn. By the 4th day, the girls were watching too. "Why's he doing this if you keep telling him no?" May asked, arms crossed, trying hard to be a woman before her time. Cora didn't know the answer. Or maybe she did and didn't want to speak it aloud. That the man wasn't helping her out of pity. It was something else, something quieter. Maybe he just understood what it felt like to carry too much weight and have no one see it. On the 5th day, Cora went outside before dawn and found him stacking firewood neatly in the shed like it was his own. She walked up, arms crossed under her shawl. "You always this stubborn." Seth didn't flinch. "Only when someone's starving and pretending not to be. That your way of talking nice?" "No, ma'am. That's my way of telling the truth." She glanced at his hands. Thick calluses. Torn knuckle, healing poorly. He'd been working, not just riding around pretending to. And he had that way about him, like he wasn't afraid of silence. Most men were. "You got a wife somewhere?" she asked. "No, ma'am, not anymore." She waited, but he didn't explain. And she didn't ask. "What do you want, Mr. Garner?" He took a long breath. "I want to haul in your winter wood. Help with the barn roof. Maybe fix that pump before the ground freezes solid." "Why?" He looked her straight in the eye. "Because you've got 3 children who don't deserve to pay for how proud their mother is." The words stung. Because they were true. She turned back toward the house. "If you're going to fix the pump, don't wake the baby." It wasn't an invitation, but it wasn't refusal either. Seth nodded and got to work. Days passed. The weather turned colder. He came each morning, sometimes before the sun rose. He never lingered, never crossed a line. He spoke little, but when he did, it was useful: where to bury fence posts so they wouldn't rot, how to check a hen for illness, how to find water lines by the shape of the grass. At first, Cora kept her distance. She handed him tools without speaking, kept her eyes on the work. But slowly something shifted. A rhythm built between them, not affection, not yet, but something steadier. A knowing. One morning she found him kneeling by the pump, sleeves rolled, wrists flecked with cold mud. She brought him coffee without a word. He looked up at her with tired eyes and said, "You didn't have to." "I know." He took the mug and cradled it for a moment, warming his hands. "You always been out here alone?" she asked. He shook his head. "Had a brother. Died in a cattle drive accident 5 winters back. Folks live up in Kansas now. I stayed." "Why?" He stared out toward the fence line. Didn't seem right to leave land that remembered someone. Cora didn't say anything. She understood more than she cared to admit. The silence between them stretched again. Not empty, just honest. Inside, Ruth was laughing at something the baby had done. The sound surprised Cora. It had been so long since that kind of joy came without effort. That night, when Seth packed up his tools, Cora walked with him to the gate. The wind had picked up, brushing dead leaves around their boots. He hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You already did once. Then here's another. What did you used to dream about before all this?" She blinked. The question hit somewhere soft. She hadn't thought about dreams in years. "I used to want to grow apples," she said quietly. "Used to think a grove of them would keep a family fed and together." He nodded. "Still might." She looked at him, tired but not hardened. "Maybe." subscribe, and keep your eyes on the horizon. The barn roof gave out on the last day of October. A sudden wind came down from the northwest, sharp as a blade, and peeled the top layer like a dried scab. The crash sent the chickens scattering and brought the children to the doorway wide-eyed. Cora stood with mud on her skirts and a saw in her hand, watching it fall. She didn't cry. She didn't even curse. She just stood there, breathing hard, like someone who'd already lost too much to mourn a roof. Seth came before dusk. He looked up at the ruin, nodded once, and unhitched a tarp from his wagon. "Looks worse than it is," he said. "Everything looks worse than it is until you're under it," she replied. They worked until dark. The girls fetched nails and held boards while Eli toddled behind them, clutching a hammer too heavy for his hand. Seth moved without complaint, without arrogance. Just a man doing a job he'd done before, the way you might patch a wound. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't expect it. By the time the stars came out, the roof was covered again, not pretty but solid enough to stand through November. Seth stood at the gate, brushing sawdust from his coat, when May approached him. She handed him a folded paper with a drawing on it, his horse sketched careful and small with a child's steady hand. "She made that," Cora said from the porch. "She's got talent. She draws what she misses. She used to draw her father's boots. Now it's the things she sees." Seth looked at the picture a long time before folding it gently and tucking it into his coat pocket. "Tell her I'll keep it safe." The days got shorter. Frost came down in the mornings like a silent warning. Seth started staying a little longer, drinking his coffee at the edge of the porch instead of leaving right away. Sometimes he brought his own bread, and Cora would slice what little cheese she had, and they'd eat in silence while the children played. It was Ruth who broke the silence one morning. "Mama said you don't believe in taking handouts, but you help people anyway. Is that different?" Seth scratched at his jaw. "Maybe I don't see this as helping." "Then what is it?" He looked at Cora. "Maybe it's just showing up when someone needs another set of hands." "That's not charity. That's just being decent." Ruth seemed to think on that a while before nodding and returning to her chores. That night, when the children were asleep and the wind was up again, Cora stood by the fire with her shawl wrapped tight. Seth was oiling the hinges on the front door. His hands worked with quiet precision. "You don't talk much about your brother," she said. "No need to. He's gone. You still carry him." "I carry a lot of things." He didn't look up, but his voice softened. "He was the only one who knew what I wanted. Everyone else thought I should run cattle, make money, build something to leave behind. But he knew I just wanted peace. Somewhere quiet. Someone steady. I thought if I worked hard enough it'd come." "And did it?" He finally looked up at her. "Maybe it's still coming." They stood there, not quite close enough to touch, but something had changed in the air. Not romance, not yet, but trust. Respect. The kind of feeling that could be built on board by board, like a roof that won't fall in. The next morning a woman from the church came knocking. Her name was Mrs. Talley, and she had a smile like vinegar. "We heard you've had a man around the place," she said, eyes sharp and judging. "Folks are starting to wonder if you're setting the right example for your daughters." Cora didn't blink. "He fixed the roof, fed my children, hauled water in the cold. If that's the wrong example, I'd rather they learn from him than from gossip." Mrs. Talley left in a huff, and Cora shut the door with a firm hand. That night she told Seth, "You're starting trouble just by being kind." "Then I'm not being kind enough," he said, and there was something in his voice, part challenge, part warmth. She looked at him long. "I don't want to owe anyone." "You don't?" "I'm not here for a debt." "Then what are you here for?" Seth took a step closer. "Not demanding, not pressing, just closer. I'm here because I believe people deserve more than survival." So do you? Cora looked away, jaw tight, but her throat ached. You don't know what I've done, she said. I don't need to. The first real snow came early, heavy and wet, sagging over the fence rails and piling in the corners of the yard. The children ran out in bare boots and came back squealing, their cheeks red and bright for the first time in months. Cora stood at the window watching them, arms crossed over her chest, the worn shawl still wrapped around her shoulders even indoors. Behind her, Seth was splitting kindling near the stove. The crack of wood was steady, rhythmic grounding. He didn't speak unless she did, and she liked that about him. She was tired of men who filled silence just to fill it. That afternoon she let him sit at the table. He had taken off his coat, revealing a shirt patched twice at the elbow, sleeves rolled to the forearms. His hands were rough but careful as he passed the bread. The girls took to him without being told to. Eli even reached for him with sticky fingers, and Seth didn't flinch, just picked the boy up with surprising ease and settled him on his lap. You good with children? Cora asked, more curious than skeptical. Used to be, he said. Had a niece once. She's grown now, up in Oregon. Last I heard, anyway. Why'd you never marry? Seth paused. His eyes dropped to his plate. Didn't meet the right person, he said. Didn't trust myself to know if I had. Cora nodded. She understood that too. That evening, when the children were in bed and the fire burned low, Seth lingered. She didn't tell him to go. He stood by the hearth, staring into the coals, and said softly, You ever think about leaving? All the time, she said. Then I remember there's nowhere else to go. There's always somewhere. Not for women like me. You mean widows? I mean women who've had to choose survival over softness, who've had to bury what they feel just to make it through the day. Seth didn't answer for a long time. Then he said, You ain't as hard as you think. She scoffed, but her voice caught. No, then why do folks look at me like I'm dangerous? Maybe because you are. Strong scares people, especially in a woman. She stared at him. And you're not scared. I've been through worse things than strength. He met her gaze and held it. For the first time, she didn't look away. Later that week, a man came riding in from Amarillo. His name was Thorne Lively, and he wore a gray suit with prairie dust still clinging to the hem. He was her husband's cousin. Not close, but close enough to smell trouble. He brought news and a threat. There's a claim on the land, he said, setting down a paper she could not read. If you can't prove he left it to you legal, they'll take it come spring. The county's getting stricter. There's value here. Cora stared at the paper like it was a death notice. I can't fight this, she said. You don't have to fight, Thorne said too smoothly. You just have to sell. And go where? You've got children. Someone'll take you in. Or there's always town. You could sew, maybe. Clean. The word clean made her chest go tight. It was the kind of word men used when they meant something else. Seth came up behind her, voice calm but steady. She's not selling. Thorne looked him up and down. And who are you to say? Seth didn't answer. He didn't need to. The set of his shoulders said enough. Thorne's eyes narrowed. You think she wants saving from where I'm standing? Looks like she's already been taken in. Cora stepped between them. You can go now, she said. I'll be back in March, Thorne said, smile too thin. Hope you've come to your senses by then. He rode off in the dust and cold. Seth didn't speak. Cora turned toward him, jaw tight. You should leave too. He blinked. What? You heard what he said. People are watching, judging. I won't have my children looked at like they're part of a scandal. And what about you, Seth? Asked voice quiet. What do you want? She didn't answer. She just closed the door. He stood on the other side of it for a long time before walking away. The days that followed settled heavy and quiet. Seth didn't come by. The sound of his boots, the scrape of his axe, even the low murmur of his voice near the porch, all gone. Cora didn't speak of it to the children, and they, sensing something had shifted, didn't ask. She woke earlier, worked harder, cooked in silence. The cold pressed deeper into the bones of the house, and the wind seemed to rattle the walls with a different kind of fury. Eli cried more. Ruth hovered. May stiffened. Every night Cora told herself she had done the right thing. She had protected them. Protected what was left of her name. That should have been enough. But each time she stirred the fire, she found herself looking at the corner of the hearth where Seth used to stand, and the emptiness there felt too loud. She started dreaming of her husband again, not as he was, but as he might have been had he stayed. In the dreams he was silent, watching her work, watching her carry what he'd left behind. She woke with sweat down her back and no one to hold it against but herself. One evening she found May sitting near the barn with her drawing book pages blowing in the wind. "You're supposed to be inside," Cora said. May didn't look up. "I wanted to draw something before it got too dark." "What is it this time?" "The man's horse. But I forgot what it looks like." Cora stood still. "It's a bay. Black legs, white spot on the nose." May glanced at her. "So you do remember." Cora sat beside her in the brittle grass. For a moment the only sound was the hush of wind in the broken fence. "Did you like him?" May asked, not looking up. Cora didn't answer right away. "He was kind." "That's not what I asked." She sighed. "It doesn't matter." "It does to me. 'Cause if someone was kind to you and you push them away, how will I know what's good when it comes from me?" Cora turned, startled. "I don't want to end up hard," May whispered. "Like you." The words stung more than anything Thorne Lively had said. Cora looked out across the frost-dusted field and felt her throat tighten. "You won't," she said. "You'll know better. You'll ask better questions. I think you should ask one now." Cora turned toward her. "What question?" May shrugged, but her voice was certain. "Why he really came." That night, after the children were in bed, Cora sat by the fire with the drawing in her hands. It was rough and half-finished, but the horse's eye was kind, steady, like the man who'd ridden it. She stared into the fire until it blurred. Then she stood, wrapped her shawl, and stepped out into the cold. She walked 3 miles over frozen pasture and gravel road. The stars were clear and cold above her. Her breath made clouds in the dark. She didn't think about how she looked. She didn't care. The wind clawed at her cheeks and she let it. Seth's cabin was a square of warmth tucked near the edge of a bluff. Smoke curled from the chimney. She knocked once, then again. When he opened the door, he looked like he'd just woken, shirt half-buttoned, hair a little unkempt. He stared at her like he wasn't sure she was real. "I shouldn't have sent you away," she said, her voice thin from wind and pride both. "Not for the reasons I told myself." Seth didn't say anything, just stepped aside. She came in slow. The cabin smelled like pine and tobacco and something warm on the stove. "I thought I was protecting my family," she said. "I thought letting someone care was dangerous, that it'd take something from me. And now I'm not sure what I'm protecting anymore except the space where you used to stand." He looked at her a long time, then said quietly, "You want me to come back?" She swallowed hard. "Only if you still want to. I never wanted to leave." She took a breath deeper than she had in weeks. "Then come back. But not just for the wood. Not just for the roof. Come back for the whole of it. For us." He nodded once. "All right." There was no kiss. No declarations. Just silence and the fire and the feeling of something long frozen finally beginning to thaw. Spring broke slow that year. The frost clung longer than it should have, and the creek behind the house swelled and receded twice before the ground softened enough to hold a shovel. Seth was there each morning, not just to work but to stay. He moved through the house like someone careful not to take up too much space, but the children made room for him without being asked. Ruth started leaving him her biscuits half-eaten and still warm. Eli took to napping near his boots, and May watched him with wary respect, like she was measuring whether he'd stay for good. Cora no longer watched him from behind curtains. She worked beside him now, sleeves rolled high, hands raw again, but not from fear. They rebuilt the barn door, planted new fence posts. He carved a cradle for Eli without saying why, just left it near the hearth one night and said it had seemed like something the boy might need. They didn't speak often of love, not the word itself, but the house held something quieter now, a steadiness, a second cup of coffee poured without asking, a coat hung on the same peg each evening, a pair of boots always beside hers. It was enough, until Thorne Lively came back. He arrived with 2 men and a rolled deed claiming the county had approved the sale. He spoke smooth like before, but now there was muscle behind him. One of the men was a lawman, or wore the badge of one. The other just watched Seth with a twitching jaw and restless fingers. Cora stood on the porch, arms folded. She wasn't shaking this time. "I told you no. And I told you the law would catch up," Thorne said, waving the paper. "This land was in his name. You've no claim if there's no will." "She has one now," Seth said, stepping forward. "Filed last week. Witnessed by 2 men in town. Her husband gave her rights when he married her. Texas law doesn't forget that easy." Thorne sneered. "That was months ago. Don't think you can rewrite the past just 'cause you found someone to warm your stove." Cora's eyes darkened. "You'll take your hands off my land, or I'll call every neighbor I've fed and helped and held through winter. And if they won't come, he will." She nodded toward Seth. Thorne looked at the lawman, but the man just shrugged. "She's within her right," he muttered. "Not much we can do if the papers hold." Thorne spit into the dirt. "You'll regret this." "No," she said. "I already did. That's why I'm not backing down now." They left in a cloud of dust. Seth watched until the road was quiet again. Then he turned to her. "You were ready," he said. "I had help," she replied. That night she took off her shawl and hung it on the wall. She did not light the fire. Instead, she stood barefoot in the doorway looking out at the field. The orchard space she and her husband had once marked with stones was still bare, but not for long. She would plant in the spring apple trees, 12 of them, maybe more. Something that would outlast her. She felt Seth's arms around her waist, slow and sure. No rush. No need to say anything. In April they married. Not in town. Not with a dress or a church or someone reading scripture too fast to mean it. Just the children and 2 friends from Marlowe and a sky clear enough to believe in again. Cora did not cry, but when May slipped a ribbon into her hair and said softly, "You look like you used to dream," something loosened in her chest. They built a new fence. Started with the north pasture. Ruth drew a map of what the orchard would look like. Seth carved a name into the barn, being Dillard and Garner Est. This year, Eli traced the letters with his fingers like they meant more than wood. They didn't wear rings. Couldn't afford them. But one morning Seth placed something smooth and cool in her hand, a river stone worn into a perfect oval. He'd found it down by the creek. She closed her fingers around it and said, "This will do." It did. And when the apple trees came small and stubborn, Cora planted them with her bare hands. Each one a promise. Each one a beginning. If this felt earned, subscribe for what comes next.